And then cue the Baudrillard mix.
The very rules of evil, of negativity and singularity, including the ultimate form of singularity, which is the whole state of things, a pure violence without object anymore. This is the typical violence of information. It's violent because what happens there is a murder of the real, the vanishing point of reality.
Let's not have a misunderstanding here.
Welcome to another edition of the Machinic Unconscious Happy Hour with your host, Cooper Cherry, the man that can make the golden flower bloom in the night, and my illustrious Mentat co-host, Mr. Taylor Atkins. We've got a spicy episode for you guys this week. First, we just want to mention, we're supported or sponsored rather by the People's Institute for Revolutionary Semiotics. And we do have a Patreon account at patreon.com/MUHH. Consider dropping us $1 a month there. And if not, leave us an awesome spicy review on iTunes. Today, we're switching up our typical content and we're going to take a dive into Max Evry's new book, a masterpiece in disarray, David Lynch's Dune, an oral history. Max, thanks so much for joining us and for writing this book. To start off, we'll just have to come with guns blazing and ask you, are you indeed an Orthodox Herbertian?
Well, first of all, thank you, Taylor and Cooper, for having me on. The show is definitely it's a brain melter. Like I can feel my like neurons firing when I'm listening to it. And and I just want the listeners at home to know that today's going to be the special needs episode of the show because I was telling them before I don't know Kierkegaard from Colonel Sanders, but I will try to keep up with these guys as best I can.
As long as you know some Zen Sunni philosophy, I think you'll be fine.
Oh, who doesn't?
I got that reference.
But am I an Orthodox Herbertian?
No, you should have said it like, are you or have you ever been? How is the communist witch trials? How is it like that? Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? A member of the
Are you now or have you ever?
Are you now? Thank you. I knew I wasn't getting it right. I'm not even good at playing as a witch hunter. Are you now or have you ever been an Orthodox Herbertian?
I always love this story of how we do talk a little bit about Orson Welles in the book. He was involved with Jodorowsky's version, and they approached him for Lynch's version, and he turned it down flat. Years earlier, in like the 40s, I think, or late 40s, there was a huge push to have Orson Welles run for Senate in Minnesota.
Okay.
And he didn't want to do it. And then the person who wound up winning was McCarthy.
Okay. Okay.
And he told Peter Bogdanovich, imagine having that on your conscience.
I'm just thinking about when you said Minnesota, I was thinking about Jesse Ventura, right? So that obviously not the same era or the same position, but
I was thinking about the guy from SNL that did Stuart Smalley.
Al Franken.
Yeah,
Al Franken. Right, yeah.
I ran into him. This is a true story. I ran into Al Franken at in the bathroom at the 2000 presidential debates. Don't ask for elaboration, but yeah, I shook his hand, and I was like, I saw Stewart Saves His Family in the theater, and he's like, wow, in the theater.
Oh, that's nice.
But we've already gone down a huge. No, you asked me, am I an Orthodox Herbertian? No, absolutely not. I've only read the first two books. I only just read Dune Messiah recently. For me, it's all about the Lynch movie. That is also, in a way, how I got through writing this book, because, if listeners don't know, this is a 560-page book that's devoted, pretty much entirely to David Lynch's Dune. The way I got through it was I said, you're not interested in the books. You're not interested in the mini series or the Villeneuve movie or the, any of that, like all that stuff is peripheral. It's about David Lynch's Dune. So just focus on that. I wasn't even necessarily focused on Lynch's other movies. This was enough.
You do give a nice run up through Lynch's rise to stardom, right? I mean, like you do kind of give a nice quick background for the development of Racerhead, his schooling, the lag in time in even making a Racerhead, and obviously the Elephant Man, stuff like that. You do a nice job of at least building up to getting the Dune script in front of him or something like that, or getting not the Dune script, but getting the opportunity. You build him up at least to that far.
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, and a lot of that is, of course, because like I think it was just whatever I thought readers needed to know to have context for what happened on Dune. Because obviously, what happened on Elephant Man comes into play. What happened on Eraserhead comes into play.
Right.
And there's a lot of the same people who were involved in those films who came in. So it's like we talk about lots of other movies and there's lots of.
I learned about a lot of the actors' other movies, the ones that got cast, and some that didn't. I learned a lot about I guess it's stuff I could have found out looking at their IMDb page, but it was much better to just like see it presented to me. It's like, oh, okay, that's why she would have been considered for the part, or this was like those kind of things. Like reading about the cast and their background was fascinating too. I mean, so yeah, it is a wealth of knowledge where you can't really compress it like David Lynch's Dune. You can't do it a disservice and excise more
The third act, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think
there are no second acts in American life is the Fitzgerald quote. There's no third act in Dune.
Yeah, I just rewatched it again last night, and I was just like, I was shocked at how it's literally just squeezed in that last 45 minutes.
Even the timing of the delivery of the dialogue feels a little, maybe it's part of the editing, but it feels, have you ever like woken up out of a nap and then time seems to be like just moving a little bit faster perceptually, and you're kind of still like everything feels a little rushed. I'm not saying like the actors did it or something, but it's almost like you can tell it's the pace is for such a sprawling, mind-blowing, bonkers movie. It does feel like it's throwing almost too much at you at once.
When you've watched the movie as many times as I have, you come to kind of appreciate that a little bit, because it's like there's definitely no filler in there. There's definitely no like, okay, let's pause and really like make it's like the first hour and change is paced very well.
It is, absolutely.
And then it just starts to go like, balls to the wall, as Kyle says in the book. It's like it's like I think it's an interesting way to digest the story. Is it the most efficient way to experience it? I don't think so. But like it's David Lynch's Dune, and it is what it is. And for me, the key to appreciating the movie is to love what's there and not so much what's not there.
I would actually be curious about your opinions of Dune Messiah, and this can even lead into the first legitimate question, because okay, so I saw the TV cut when I was like 6 years old, and it blew my mind. And then I later on ended up reading the books. I want to say I was like either junior high or freshman or sophomore in high school. And so I read Dune, Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, and then I never could get through God Emperor until a few years ago, actually. On my first read, I think just coming from the Lynch movie and having the more traditional kind of, I guess, what is it, like hero's journey story, basically the way that
the Joseph Campbell.
Precisely. So I had that expectation going into Messiah, and then he completely undercuts it, and there's very little action, and it's all this sort of sulking, slow moving tragedy, which now I absolutely am obsessed with. I'm like, Dune Messiah has become my favorite in the entire book series, I think, at this point.
I think you're absolutely right. I think Dune Messiah is a better book because it is a lot more focused. The first book is sort of an ensemble. The second book is very much Paul's story. And I think that the stuff that he's dealing with, and as you say, like, 12 years later is definitely not, and they lived happily ever after. It is a huge sort of punch to the gut if you perceived the ending of the first book to be triumphant, which it really isn't supposed to be. Because I think even at the end of the book, Paul's kind of like, oh God, what have I done? And he's already kind of being swept up in something that's bigger than him. What makes Dune Messiah interesting? Yeah, it's like, it's very static. It's very, there's not a lot of action. There's not a lot of, battle scenes and all the, the space opera tropes. But what you do get is you get this sort of psychological one-upsmanship, gamesmanship, where it's like, it's like, I'm 17 steps ahead of you. Oh, well, I'm 19 steps ahead of you. Oh, well, I'm 27 steps ahead. This 5-dimensional chess that's happening between, the Spacing Guild and Paul and Cytail and all those characters, and it's really fascinating. And it would have been really interesting too to see what David would have done with that as well. I think it would have been much more in his wheelhouse.
Totally.
Yeah.
As far as the potential, the trilogy for Villeneuve would be, I'm not very confident in Jason Momoa's ability to pull off Zensuni Mentat very well, or just the movie itself. I feel like, how do you make that? That's not a blockbuster style movie, so I don't know how.
Well, there's that
work.
one moment in Dune Messiah where he's with Alia and he's like, "That's not why I'm dangerous," and then he kisses her. Oh my God, that'd be like a show-stopping moment for Jason Momoa.
Tell us about your first experience with this film, because like I said, this is something that really just blew my mind, and I've been obsessed with ever since.
Well, this is also the kind of origin story we usually ask our guests. So this is
right.
kind of,
Yeah.
usually the occasion is a book or something they've written, or like a field of expertise, or, something they've dedicated their lives to. So this is kind of like, tell us your origin story about, not just, I'm kind of piggybacking off of Coop here, your first reactions to Lynch's Dune, but also how perhaps it's sprawled into this passion for writing the book, the present book.
Well, it's funny because it's like, me and Dune, Dune has not been a huge obsession from the jump. It was more like an earwig that crawled into my ear and laid its eggs and slowly, grew. But my dad was obsessed with the books, not with the movie. I don't even know if he saw the movie. I think he was very dismissive of it, but like he was in love with the books. Heartily encouraged me to read them. And what I did was I taped the movie off of Sci-Fi Channel. I later realized I taped the Alan Smithy version, the extended cut for TV, because it was long. It was like 4 hours long. And I was kind of watching the movie in spurts and then reading the book in spurts. So I did them both concurrently. That was an interesting way to read the book and to watch the movie, because if you've seen the movie, it's very true to the book. It's a very, in some cases, literal translation, except for the places where, it diverges, like the whole point of the book. But it felt very dense. It felt very Shakespearean. It definitely was not what I was used to with things like, Star Wars and stuff like that. But at the time I think I was like 11 or 12. I was also obsessed with Blade Runner. So Blade Runner is a much more simpler film, to understand for a teenager or tween or whatever. But I still appreciated that kind of dark, kind of European aesthetic, and was also very tickled by the use of the voiceovers for the internal monologues. There's a comic book store here in Brooklyn called Anyone Comics, and I was talking to the owner about Dune, and he's like, "Oh, Dune is the most comic book movie ever made. All the thought bubbles that are always in comic books are in the movie." And I'm like, yeah, that's really true. It's a strange movie. It's not Star Wars. It's, it's its own thing. And I think I could always tell it was a kind of a compromised film, that it didn't flow quite right in whatever version you watched. I definitely have a preference for the theatrical cut, just because I think it moves better. It is actually David's cut. I had been very sort of snarky about it at points in my life. And then when I embarked on doing this book, like the deeper I dug into it, the more just incredible detail and nuance I found. And also the fact that like I've been a movie journalist for like 18 years or something. I've watched the blockbuster go from something that was already pretty dumbed down to just something that is like a tailored object that's had all of the corners, removed with a belt sander. All these movies are so homogenous and, 4 quadrants. Everything has to be for everybody. And to look at a movie like Dune now, even in its heavily compromised state, you're like, wow, how did this movie get through the system? How did all this weirdness and all this, all of these Lynchian fetishes and removing nipples and and then all this stuff. How did this get through? This is amazing. In that sense, I think that's why you saw a lot of people who had never seen the film before, like when the Villeneuve one came out. I think a lot of people watched the Villeneuve one and then they watched the Lynch one and they're like, "Oh my god, like this Lynch movie is way crazier than the Villeneuve one." Because Villeneuve's whole mission statement was, "I'm going to make the most accessible version of this story." And Lynch's the whole thing was, "I want to embrace the strangeness. I want to embrace the foreign feeling of being thrown 10,000 years into the future in media
Right.
res." So,
Right.
This also might be a good time to talk a little bit about the several different cuts of the film, since these, like I said, the TV cut is the first exposure that we both had to the film itself. I didn't watch the theatrical until I was like in middle school or something like that. That's probably what actually got me to go back and read the books, I think, if I remember correctly.
I mean, yeah, you said it was a runtime of like 4 hours versus what Dune's cut or Lynch's cut is
Yeah, I
what,
think they
2 hours and 17 minutes, or
I can't remember what
maybe
channel
even less.
can't remember what channel it aired on, but it was like a two-part, 2 hour, like it was long as hell. I do remember that specifically. It was like super long when I was a kid, in particular, 4 hours when you're a kid feels way different than it does now. But even so,
yeah, there are these wildly different cuts. I mean, the thing for some reason, there's this perception that David took his name off the movie. That's not specifically true. Like, he took his name off of the television cut because he actually wanted to be involved in that, but they didn't want to pay him anything or put any real money into finishing effects and things like that. So he walked away. It was just another kind of painful epilogue to what was already a painful experience for him. So yeah, so he took his name off the TV cut, and it's understandable because the TV cut is an abomination. It's got scenes in it that they didn't want to pay for the effects, so they would just take effects from the end and put them at the beginning to patch holes. There's some scenes that have shots from 5 different scenes in them. It's very difficult to watch if you're kind of aware of theatrical cut is smooth. There's some stuff that looks cheap, but it doesn't go to that extent of sloppiness, and sloppy storytelling. And, there are whole scenes that are out of order from the way Lynch intended. And that's why I always tell people, if you're going to watch the movie, watch the Spice Diver edit, which is the fan edit that a guy did. He spent something like 10 years or something, just very
Wow.
painstakingly going through and not only using scenes from the TV cut, but using deleted scenes from the DVD, in some cases going in and fixing effects and adding in the blue and blue eyes and stuff like that, just like taking way more care than Universal ever did. and and he removes the Make It Rain ending, and he does something closer to, I think, the ending that Lynch had intended.
and we can talk about the ending at the end of the discussion today. In another podcast, you were discussing a lot of people like the art direction and the costuming from the Lynch version. That's kind of where my love or passion for the film really is directed. Is there something like that for you that kind of stands out? A performance, set design, and music, whatever, is there something that kind of gets under your skin?
Certainly the costumes. I think Bob Ringwood's costumes are incredible. One of the things we talk about in the book, because Ringwood was kind enough to participate, and
Right.
he doesn't do a lot of interviews now. He's retired. He went on to do Tim Burton's Batman, and he also uncredited did the costumes for the first X-Men movie. And those are both like seminal keystone movies and the modern superhero films. And if you look at the Dune costume, there is a direct lineage from the Dune costume to the Batman costume to the X-Men costumes. In a way, it is like the prototype for the modern day superhero movie, because it was the first time you saw like a suit with like muscles built into it and had that rubbery fetishy look to it.
That's kind of funny because I'm very much an X-Men purist and I hate the adaptations that have been made so far, particularly the costumes, especially in the first X-Men. Like, so that's hilarious because I love The Guildsman, I think in particular, is like the Guildsman costuming is my touchstone for my current. I'm into fashion quite a bit, so they are very much my touchstone for my kind of look, my goth space wizard look, I call
So
it.
so you need some used body bags, is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, Ringwood did use body bags for the Guildsmen. That's absolutely true. Somebody was like, there's a lot of debate in the Dune community about whether or not that's true. Like, I mean, like they didn't blink. They're like, yeah, they're body bags. They're used body. It's like we didn't tell
Yeah.
anybody what they
They're
were.
used body bags. So
Yeah.
gently used. Right. I mean,
Certified pre-owned CPO.
Yeah, that was a nice little detail that I saw. I think you may have written used in all caps.
This is what I wore to like the Lynch, not the Lynch, the Villeneuve.
That's pretty cool.
This is my Spacing Guild kind of vibe.
So you made this.
It's basically stuff that I bought, separate pieces. This hoodie is like one of my favorite hoodies because it has kind of this cowl-esque. This part here kind of stands up like a cowl.
This reminds me of the second stage guild.
Yeah.
Navigator. Yeah, and if listeners don't know, like in the movie, if you watch the movie, there's different stages of the guildsman. There's the first stage navigator, which is just like a guy. Although at a later point in the movie, he starts to have like cracks in his head. he's already mutating.
Yeah, that's from spice withdrawal, I think, is why he starts to ooze.
And then the second stage was supposed to be kind of like almost like an elephant man looking thing, but instead they didn't have the money for it, so they just put guys in like black hoods, like so you couldn't see their lumpy faces. And then the third stage is what you see in the floating in the tank. I guess that his name is Edric.
Obviously, the still suits also are incredible. I prefer the Lynch design 1,000 times better than the Villeneuve movie, but not every comparison is that way, right? I think some of the costuming in the Lynch film, the starter car, for example, those are very like lazy. They're kind of like baggy hazmat suits with like the green lighting inside of the little face window. And then the Harkonnen outfits are also, aside from like Fade and even the Fade and Raban costume is a little bit bad. Now, the Barons is fantastic, I think, in the Lynch, but so it's kind of uneven, but some of them are amazing. Some of Irulan's dresses in particular are probably, these would be like $50,000 dresses. They're couture level design and so forth. A lot of the ones that she has with like the like veil across the face.
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. It's what you're talking about with the Baron's costume. I mean, the Baron's costume is made out of colostomy bag rubber. Everything had to have kind of an eerie connotation, when it came to, stuff like the Guildsman and the Baron. And he worked with some guy who made prosthetic eyes to make that Baron costume, and it weighed a ton because Kenneth McMillan wanted to weigh as much as the Baron was supposed to weigh. And it had like a catheter in it so he could pee, and he couldn't walk in it. He had to be carted around everywhere.
He's not supposed to walk, he's supposed to fly around, right?
Yeah, but I mean like offsets, it's like,
right.
Oh my God. Like, can you imagine? Just in that all day?
Insane. Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, that is not entirely unusual. We were talking about like superhero costumes and things like that. Like I know like years ago I was on the set of Tron Legacy, and I remember the actors could not sit down. They had to just lean against pillars and stuff. Like all these costumes are extremely uncomfortable and constrictive, just kind of, that's the norm.
I can't imagine. I remember the tale from the book about the extras having to wear the still suits in the Sonoran Desert, basically, and there's burning tires, and they added sulfur to the mix as well. Can you imagine the cancer those people were exposed to? Those poor like extras that probably got like $10 a day or something insane.
It's unreal. Yeah, like the what they had to endure there, and and they talk about at one point there were like hundreds of these guys in still suits running down a hill, and to get them to run down the hill, they put a guy with a jug of water at the bottom. Which is a little sadistic.
That's almost too on the nose.
Yeah. It sounds like it was not the most fun movie to make sometimes, like, especially the conditions at Churubusco Studios in Mexico City. It was a very rundown, old facility at that time. I think it was on the verge of almost closing at one point prior to them coming in. They had, like, they had to add phone lines and plumbing and, like everything had to be put in, and a lot of times the electricity would go out, so they had to use generators. It just sounded like it was a very, you know, hard movie to make, and I know that's one of the reasons why Ridley Scott bowed out of making it, because he went to that studio and he was like, "No."
And Lynch was probably just too new on the scene. Elephant Man was really the only full-on Hollywood picture. Eraserhead, I think he did when he was at AFI, the conservatory, and got a grant or something.
That's
do
right.
that.
Yeah, Eraserhead was a 4-year process where he was building all the sets inside of a barn at Greystone Manor, which is on the AFI campus. And yeah, it just lasted for years and years and years, and people stuck with David because they liked the movie, they thought the movie was going to be good, and then it became a success on kind of its own metric as like a midnight cult movie.
Yeah.
And then Elephant Man is like almost the total opposite. It's like a prestigious Oscar caliber biopic. So you had these two movies that he'd done that were both successful in their own way. And people could kind of read into that whatever they wanted. They're like, "Oh yeah, you could do Star Wars, you could do this, you could do this, you could do that."
Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, and in hindsight, you look back, you're like, "Oh no, David doesn't do that." I think Dune was an interesting sort of compromise in the sense that yes, it was a big blockbuster, sci-fi epic. Yes, it did have a merchandising, component to it, and it was a big franchise. On the other hand, it was an opportunity for Lynch to do the kind of, world building that he's so great at, that he later went on to do in, Twin Peaks, which is like Twin Peaks is like its own Star Trekian universe.
Right, yeah.
And yeah, and I think, had he gone on to do the two other Dune pictures he was contracted to do, I think he would have, really done a bang up job expanding the world, cinematically. The reason Lynch was such a great choice for this movie is because he's so good at world building, and he's so good at relaying ideas visually. What some people would take 2 or 3 scenes to do, he can do with just one kind of interesting image. Like, for example, in the scene where Paul is attacked by the Hunter Seeker emerges from a panel on his bed that has an image of a lion. If you remember from the beginning, in the Emperor's throne room, the Emperor has 2 golden lions by him. So it's that kind of connection is the kind of stuff that Lynch is so great at.
The Golden Lion throne is the imperial throne too for House Carino. Are you a big Lynch fan, just generally speaking, or does the Dune film have a particular place in your heart, or what's your relationship to the kind of corpus of Lynch's film work?
That's an interesting question, because you would think that I would be like the number one Lynch fan of the universe, but I'm really not. A lot of his films I watched for the first time because I was writing this book. Like, I watched Eraserhead for the first time. I'd wanted to see Eraserhead. It's not that I didn't want to see it. It's just I kind of knew about it tangentially, but like, yeah, I actually sat down and watched it, and I have 2 children. So to me, it wasn't weird at all. It was like, this is a documentary. This is like, this is a movie about parental anxiety from a reluctant father. And I completely jived with that. And I was like, there's nothing strange about this movie at all, because it is how you feel. You're terrified all the time. Like, any parent in the world has a Saw movie going on in their head every day. And I am no different. I loved Eraserhead. I like Blue Velvet. Some of the other films I find challenging, like, Mulholland Drive is a very challenging movie. I appreciate Twin Peaks, but it's not my cup of tea necessarily. I mean, it's like, I do tend to gravitate towards filmmakers who have a distinct visual style and, do the kind of dreamy, surrealistic stuff, but they tend to be more people like Terry Gilliam or Jean-Pierre Jeunet, or Tim Burton. And it's like, the thing that like all those guys have in common is like they're all cartoonists. So they come from a cartooning background, and David Lynch comes from a fine art background. So I think that's like kind of where there's a little bit of a something obstructing my being able to appreciate some of his stuff. Not all of it. I like many of his films, but yeah, but like he's I think he himself is the thing that I became obsessed with when I was writing the book. Just him as a character, kind of, you
Right.
know,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
he
Makes
has this
sense.
kind of cult of personality
Right.
around him. What do you guys think of Lynch?
I mean, he has that kind of mad scientist vibe a little bit, but I'm
Yeah.
actually like you. I'm not a huge fan of his overall work. When I first saw Mulholland Drive in something like 2001, I was completely dumbfounded. I didn't know what the fuck. I was like, what the fuck did I just watch? What the fuck was
Hmm.
this?
Yeah.
So I appreciate some aspects of it. Like there are some really incredible moments in some of the films that are he is the master of this kind of almost Hitchcockian sort of jump scare or like building the
Hmm.
dramatic tension. I'm thinking about the diner scene in Mulholland Drive, for example, or the Robert Blake scene at the party in what is it, Lost Highway, where
Hmm.
he's like, call your house right now. I'm there. That shit was legitimately some of the creepiest, scariest shit I've ever seen in a movie. And that's still whatever his name is in the book or movie rather, creeps me the fuck out. Twin Peaks is probably, aside from Dune, my favorite thing, but I think some of that is nostalgia because I watched the original Twin Peaks, when it aired in like 90, 91, 92. I was a kid, so I didn't, I was like 10 years old. So I probably had no clue what the fuck was going on.
I prefer the Fire Walk with Me, weirdly, even though I know like the like people love the quirkiness of Twin Peaks, but like I enjoyed the kind of delving into the underbelly that he goes in, and the real dark places that movie goes. I think it's really interesting. And that one is, the Twin Peaks series is kind of a melding of Lynch and Mark Frost. Fire Walk with Me is pure Lynch, and there are a lot of references to Dune in the Twin Peaks universe. You got the signet ring, is it the fireman's fortress is a lot like the fortress, the Atreides fortress in the Dune movie. There's a lot of interesting parallels. There's even like I think at one point, Agent Cooper, your namesake, Agent Cooper does a kind of a version of the litany of against fear as Agent Cooper, and in all the cases, whether it was Dune, Blue Velvet, Twin Peaks, Kyle MacLachlan is absolutely the stand-in for Lynch. Certainly in Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks for the mannerisms and the way he speaks, but even in Dune, in terms of the young man going through
Oh,
a
right. Yeah.
spiritual journey and having that spiritual awakening, I think that was very autobiographical for David.
I think I mentioned this in our DMs, but I've often wondered what it means that my name is Cooper Dale Cherry and it's Agent Dale Cooper who loves cherry pie. There's something fucked up about that. There's some kind of weird something going on strange there. But Taylor, you're kind of more of a Lynch fan, would you say, right? Or am I putting words
I
in
mean,
your mouth?
I'm probably like on the same level as you, Coop, in terms of where you mentioned Lost Highway, you mentioned
Mulholland Drive, yeah.
I have a soft spot for Blue Velvet. That's one of my favorite Lynch films. I do have a soft spot for Twin Peaks, even though season 2, I think it's regrettable that Lynch wasn't as involved as season 1, right? Because season 1 is like those 6 episodes, which really catapult the narrative and get you hooked. And then season 2 starts off really well, but then in the middle, it kind of, you can tell ABC's like, oh, well, we'll green light you for 24 episodes or some shit. I forget what it is. It's like 20 something. And so a lot of those episodes are like the James episodes where everybody's like, I don't give a fuck about this guy. Like, cut that shit down, and so Lynch like comes back towards the end to quote unquote save the series and be the hero, and it does end, I think, in a way that, not to say season 2 is all bad, obviously not. It's just it does at least end with that kind of iconic image, you know, and I think obviously it's a flawed show, but I also agree with you, Max, that Fire Walk with Me, if you watch like season 1, 2, and then watch Fire Walk with Me, I think that prepares you for the return.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Right? I
Mhm.
mean, that kind of prepares you for how weird the fucking return is compared to the majority.
Yeah.
Twin Peaks, yes, it's weird, but it was still made for ABC for a, you know, a prime time
Prime
slot
time
or whatever.
audience. Yeah.
So it's
Mhm.
still made with an audience in mind. And so I think that that's both good and bad because that constriction also allows for some of the more surreal moments to pop. Fire Walk with Me is like we're getting the Lynchian id, right? We're for the most
Mhm.
part, or we're at least getting a little bit more of it. And so that I think if you watch season 1, 2, and then go straight into the return, I don't know if you're necessarily ready for the surreal to be because what the return was on Showtime, so
Yeah.
that's like you gotta
Right.
pay.
More of a
That's a
prestige style show
subscription
too.
based model, right? So you know you're going to he's obviously allowed more freedom, and I think that the movie allows you to get in that more Lynchian vein.
One of the reasons why The Return is what it is, and this is just my theory, but I think that, he hadn't made anything in about 10 years when he did The Return in terms of movies or TV, and, I think he knew his days were kinda numbered in terms of, like, being able to finance the kind of stuff that he does. So, like, I think originally the order was for 9 episodes, and he demanded it be 18 episodes. And there was a whole negotiation around that, and I think the reason he expanded it from 9 to 18 was because he just wanted to do every idea he had left. He just wanted to do he had a lot in him, and he wanted to get it out, and this was gonna be the only viable, platforms, his one franchise that, still had value. So
It nicely coincided more or less with the 25 years
mhm,
prophecy in the what in the is it the Black Lodge or whatever where Laura
mhm,
Palmer's or her doppelganger, whatever. I think that really does tie the room together.
mhm, yeah,
But in terms of both of you, I don't necessarily consider Lynch to be like on the top of my list. You know, I mean, I remember just a couple of nights ago for the show, I put on Lynch's Dune again, and my wife's kind of sitting there, and she's just like, you know, you showed this to me a couple years ago. What the fuck? What is this? And then the next day, because she had seen part one, the Villeneuve, put that on, and she's like, "Oh my god, this is so much better." And I get that. I get that mindset where it's like, okay, you know, Lynch isn't for her. She's not even that gung ho about fucking Twin Peaks. She finds it quirky and interesting, but even for her, she's like, you know, come on. You know,
yeah.
so
It just depends on what's your threshold
Right.
but
for
you know,
weirdness.
the singularity of Lynch's Dune, and I really do think you if you go into it with the mindset of what it's going to be and you have a nice idea of it, you can immerse yourself. But I do think, especially now, what 40 years later or so, you know, if you don't have that background, don't know what you're getting into, if it comes on, there might be that kind of wall that's going to ward you off and keep you from enjoying it for what it is. And maybe there was that at the very beginning. Maybe that's why it was panned so well, right? That you either get sucked in by the world building, the costumes, like you know, Coop was saying, the music. You either get sucked into that world, as flawed as it may be, or you know, you're left kind of just standing, you know, on the side of the road, just looking in at this you know, fever dream, right?
Right.
It
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
Yeah,
which is a good way to describe something like Mulholland Drive. It's kind of a fever dream, right? I mean, like
yeah,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah.
you either go
Literally, pretty
along for
much.
the
Yeah.
ride or you're just like, let me out. Come on.
Not to put everything on Lynch either. I mean, because I think
Right.
some of it has to do with the accessibility of Herbert's work as well.
Mhm.
Like this is very difficult material to make palatable for a mass audience, which a film of this size needs to survive. It needs to be easily understandable, and that's a difficult, line to toe, especially a movie I like to compare it to is like Tim Burton's Batman. If you watch Tim Burton's Batman, is just as messy and nonsensical and, strange and really not true to the source material. It's like any criticism you can levy at Dune, you can levy at Batman. The difference is Batman is a very accessible idea. It's
Yeah.
a very simple idea. It's very iconic and easy to understand. Whereas Dune is Shakespearean tragedy, and it's very complex and there's a lot of nuance to it. I think some of that falls on Herbert as well.
Absolutely. I was just reading the other day in the Dune subreddit, which I'm somewhat active in, that somebody was they were complaining about how the way that Herbert writes, as opposed to someone like Tolkien. Maybe this is what I love about Herbert's writing. It definitely can be very clunky. He has like some goofy stuff in there, but a lot of the ideas are really fantastic. Tolkien like describes everything. Herbert oftentimes I feel like he leaves a lot of space for the reader to fill in the specific details. Like he gives you just enough kind of scaffolding to project your imagination on. And I think he is great in a sense at kind of this weird world building. It sometimes does absolutely get clunky.
You can say the same thing about Tolkien, man. Like you flip open Tolkien to a random page. Don't tell your roommate I said this. A huge fan, but you turn to a random page and you've got like you've got a song that's in the middle of the narrative, and
Right.
like you said, like they just have totally different styles. And
But he's much more descriptive, I think. And so would someone like, George
it's
R.R. Martin is a lot more actually describing the scenery, whereas Herbert is a lot more, like I said, he kind of gives you an image maybe, but he doesn't like go into the specifics of like, he may say the urine and feces are processed in the thigh pads, but he's not like going into the intricacies of how the actual still suit works.
I mean,
Yeah.
description can get to the point of gluttony and it can become pornographic. I'm just saying it's a different thing, but you're right. And I do think trying to do the first book, that arc, because so much of it is the world building. And this is what we said at the beginning, you guys were laying out that first half of the movie of Lynch's Dune seems to go smooth.
Yeah,
and,
totally.
and seems to have a nice pace and seems to set the stage. But to a certain extent, if they'd have done it in 2 installments, perhaps they could have set up the arc. Maybe it would have ended somewhere near where Villeneuve's does, right? Where he starts to become the leader of the Fremen.
First of all, this is something I cut out from my book, but Tolkien hated Dune.
Oh yeah, I heard that too.
I'm not surprised.
Oh yeah, he wrote a letter to a friend being like, "Oh, I hate this book." There is a certain, there's a certain clunkiness to Tolkien. I mean, the thing I don't like about Tolkien is that everybody speaks in the same way. Everybody speaks like Tolkien. Not a lot of variation with the characters. With Dune, like the thing that was important, I think, to Herbert was more the ideas and rather than the pulpiness and the adventure of it all. Like that's all kind of background for him because he's telling this story about how a well-meaning young man becomes a monster, like a true monster. It's a reluctant monster, but doesn't matter because, like, what does he do? Like, he kills, what do they say, like 64 billion people? Those are some numbers, man.
Yeah, he's like looking at Genghis Khan and Hitler and Dune Messiah and be like, these are rookie numbers.
Lightweights. Yeah, and yeah, and so much of it is just like, like he's caught up in this machine around him and he doesn't even like want to be Maudib anymore. Lynch, I think he sort of tiptoed around that. Like I think he dipped his toe into the waters of that a little bit because there is a deleted scene where Paul is having a dream about his terrible purpose. And I know that there were drafts of the script he wrote where it ended with like an ocean of blood, where they were leaning a little more into what Herbert intended. But I don't know whether it was a mandate from the De Laurentises or Universal, or just that like they figured it was simpler to just do the Joseph Campbell hero's journey type thing and make him a real messiah and make him a hero, but that's what they did. And that's the movie and it has his name on it. So we have to reckon with that. You can't say, oh, but he really meant to do this. No, we have to deal with what's in front of us. And yeah, and what is in front of us is, you have Herbert, who is, a guy who's, he he wrote speeches for politicians. He was involved in politics, very mistrusting of charismatic leaders. And the whole point to him was to show how a decent person can become a monster. And Lynch's version is about embracing the idea of Paul as a messiah, and Paul is, as a hero, and as somebody who has this awakening within him, and unleashes this reservoir of power from within to defeat his enemies. And yeah, and I think in real life, Lynch was a follower of the Maharishi and of transcendental meditation, and that's something that you have to consider while you're watching it, whether that's what Lynch intended or not. Like, that's the film he made. He made a film about a great charismatic leader. That is key for me, and I hope for other Lynch fans now, to understanding why Dune is a David Lynch movie. David Lynch can talk all day about how, oh, it wasn't the movie I wanted to make, yada yada. But it's like I think it has so much of him in it. Like one of the things we talk about in the book is the weirding modules, and how the weirding modules are not in the book. And what are the weirding modules? They're a source of power that's activated by a word. Okay, well, that's transcendental meditation. Transcendental meditation is you focus on a word, and you clear your mind, and you just repeat the mantra over and over in your mind, it's supposed to imbue you with serenity and power and whatever. These are the kind of things that nobody has really talked about, I think, prior to this, because Lynch was dismissive of the movie, and because most people have been dismissive of the movie. And I think it's something that, if we really want to reconsider it, you have to grapple with these ideas that Lynch really imbued this with his philosophy and his point of view of the world. And yeah, and I think that's one of the, a really good reason to revisit the film.
I think what's actually interesting, and especially for Taylor and I, and like the philosophy that we discuss heavily on the show, a lot of it I mentioned in the intro, right? The Institute for Revolutionary Semiotics. So that is getting into, I suppose, the material force of language, we might say. And we discuss a lot of psychoanalysis as well. And so this kind of blending of semiotics and psychoanalysis, where words do impact the body, like words have an actual physical force that impacts the body and how the body reacts to words. So there is kind of this interesting, like, metaphorical thing going on here that kind of overlap, and then maybe that's where my interest is derived from a little bit. I don't know, Taylor, if you want to digress a little bit. But I was just thinking about, like, Lacan, right? Because he talks about how the signifier, right, it marks the or even inscription, I suppose, for Deleuze and Guattari, but like Lacan often talks about how the body is kind of the scission of the signifier, right? Like the body is kind of cut, like there's an actual physical impact involved in language. So I think that's kind of a cool, at least conceptually, right? Like, of course, book fans are probably going to be upset, but I think Lynch had a point in terms of he didn't want to have a bunch of karate fighting going out in the desert. That kind of would have looked a little bit stupid. I don't know how you would have
Yeah.
made like the Prana Bindu training or fighting, what have you, look cinematic.
To be fair, some of the fight scenes, like with the starter car you mentioned earlier, are a little clunky in
Oh
Lynch's
yeah, they're very
Dune.
bad.
But I guess to tie together your point with Max's, I mean, in terms of the transcendental meditation and focusing on a word, I mean, so much of the powers that Paul gains from his mother, the Bene Gesserit, is sort of mastering the voice, right? And it does have these powers on others and in the world, right? So we can kind of you can kind of see how that's already materialized now with Lynch in terms of the transcendental meditation and sort of that kind of focus on. I mean, I suppose it goes with what we've discussed, right? if we want to, for lack of a better word, his use of dream imagery and surrealism, even though it may not have shown up in like the final stage, right? Which is something you mentioned, Max, right? The sort of the ending to the movie being what, oh, you mentioned another ending dipping into it being that river of blood, but also the ending that you've uncovered in the storyboards, the
Hmm.
which you've called the transcendental ending, which I think is interesting.
I don't know
The
what
end is
you
very
would call it
right.
besides that, but I mean, it's for people who haven't seen the video yet. It's been posted online. It's been on Den of Geek. I put together a video based around these storyboards that I uncovered that were tossed out. They were special effects storyboards, and some of the shots from them did wind up in the movie, and those shots are in the video. But yeah, it's to describe it in a nutshell is it's Paul. We go into Paul's mind, kind of, and we see this eruption from space, this wave of light, and then from the light comes like 1,000 small guild navigators, and they all like burrow into his face and his eyes, and then Paul kind of vomits angels, and the angels destroy the guild navigators, and then Paul transcends to this other totally other level, which has a lot of water imagery, a lot of faces. You see the face of Jessica, you see Alia as a fetus. At the end, you see the Golden Lotus, which is a reference to a line from Dune Messiah, where I think the character's name is
Baruch.
Baruch. Yeah. So Baruch says, that he thought that Paul would be the one to make the golden flower bloom in the night. But of course, this is not just a golden flower. This is a golden lotus, and then this is
Right.
Lynch, like the lotus. It's a very important image in transcendental meditation. When you're doing transcendental meditation, you're in the lotus position. Come on. That's the ending that I posted. It's not the ending that's in the movie. We have to consider the ending that they did too. But it is interesting to consider this alternative because it just speaks even more to what Lynch had intended. And it is, of course, loaded with Boonwellian symbolism. And yeah, and I think it's a really trippy, almost 2001 Space
Oh yeah,
Odyssey
right. That's
style
very true.
ending. What did you guys think of that video?
I love it actually. I mean, I think that's the kind of weird shit that I wanted. I love the Hodorowski stuff is a little bit like that was too campy, I think, for me. But like some of it where he talks about, I think in Jodorowsky's Dune, he says he has a quote. It's like, I want to make a movie that's gonna impact people the way that taking LSD does, but without taking LSD. And that has always been, I think, as someone who at one point had aspirations to be a filmmaker, that would be like my guiding light for making a film is I want to make a film that is as close to the psychedelic experience as possible. So I love this very surreal imagery. And I mean, the way that a lot of the surreal imagery is folding space by the guild navigators, etc. Whenever Paul does take the water of life and he has those visions, Lynch does a fairly serviceable job of trying to display like this kind of otherworldly, kind of trippy shit that I love and this is kind of something I was hoping that would be touched upon a little bit better in the new movie.
No, and a lot of people have pointed that out to me actually, that they wish there was more of that weirdness, that there was more of that. When a lot of people read the book of Dune, so many people said the same thing. Oh, I got like 60 pages in and then I had to go back and start again because it finally clicked, and it throws you into this world and you kind of don't know what to make of it because it has its own terminologies, its own sociologies that are different from ours. It is cool that you mentioned Jodorowsky also because, because this ending could have just as easily been made by Jodorowsky. Jodo and Lynch are both sort of the children of Boonwell, and that they're both grand, surrealists in their own way.
Just to continue, I suppose the thread we're on as far as the transcendental stuff and the
Mhm.
philosophy stuff I was mentioning and psychoanalysis, and you might not even be aware of this, Max, but Herbert himself met this couple Ralph and Irene Slattery, who I think Irene was a Jungian psychoanalyst, and then her husband Ralph was trained as a Freudian. So Frank met this couple and they kind of exposed him to those ideas. And a lot of that, obviously, the Joseph Campbell stuff is certainly very much in conversation with Jung, right? For example. But a lot of that, and there's other, Heidegger gets involved, he gets some exposure to philosophy. So I think these ideas are definitely like in Frank's work. And this is something that I am personally working to write a book on, this kind of huge like tome about these strange philosophical connections within Dune and the series.
I mean, what you're talking about too is just sort of the archetypes of storytelling. I read a little bit about the reason why we crave like a 3-act structure. It's like if you went to write a script and you didn't know about 3-act structure, you probably would have a 3-act structure anyway, because that is the way we like to process stories. And that goes into whatever, Jungian archetypes, just things that are just, in our lizard brain that we react to.
I hadn't ever really thought about it like that. I'm glad you posed it that way, because I think there's kind of an interesting, I guess, connection to, this is kind of going into the weeds a bit, but like Hegel's dialectic is, what is it? Synthesis, antithesis. I'm fucking it up
Thesis,
there.
antithesis, synthesis.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I think you're maybe right there as far as like, in terms of how you structure the screenplay, right? There's like the inciting incident, like there's the problem that gets encountered, right? Like there's the challenge, I suppose, to be quick and dirty in this film. That's like the Duke's assassination, right, by the Harkonnens. So that would be the kind of inciting incident that takes Paul into, then he encounters the Fremen. That conflict sort of synthesizes into this ending that, I guess, making it rain and becoming the actual Messiah would be sort of the synthesis in a certain sense of that. But that's being very reductive as far as Hegel is concerned. But I think that is maybe something interesting that I hadn't really considered as far as storytelling goes.
Taylor, what do you think?
Well, I was gonna say the fourth turn, the negativity.
Yeah, exactly.
is where we see
maybe that's Messiah, right?
Paul become the preacher or whatever, right? So that's the follow-up, even if the seeds are sparsely, they're planted in the original Dune, but it's not very latent. But yeah, I mean, I can see what you're both talking about. And Coop, we may want to ask a little bit more about some of the interviews in the book. We've talked about the.
Well, I think I had a good. We were talking about Jodorowsky. We were talking about Jodorowsky's Dune, and Jodorowsky famously had gotten H.R. Geiger involved. Geiger obviously worked with Ridley Scott for Alien, and even though and you talk about this in the book, Max, so Geiger wasn't directly involved with Lynch, but I think that in some capacity, some of the, I don't know, maybe it's just like the art direction, like some of it kind of still sneaks in. And I'm thinking about the staircase, and you even have a photo in the book, a black and white still photo of the way that was, or it shows kind of the construction. And I'm going to pull up my email because I think this is just a magnet. I mean, look at that.
Yeah,
I mean,
on Caladan.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that looks very much the kind of biomechanical. This is like Geiger-esque. Absolutely. If you compare this to the derelict ship in Alien, for example, I think you can absolutely see the through line from Geiger. Do you kind of see what I'm getting at? What do you think?
No, totally. Yeah. I thought the same thing probably when I saw the movie. And, I think Giger and Alien were such a seminal film at the time. I think you see a lot of films trying to ape that look. You can also see it in Life Force. You can see it in a lot of the Alien ripoffs that came out, like Galaxy of Terror. And there were a lot of people sort of biting off Giger. And I think there was like a certain sense that like maybe the two, Lynch and Giger, were kind of riffing off each other, because I know Lynch was very angry at Giger because he thought that the alien in specifically the baby alien in
Oh yeah,
Alien
that makes
looks
sense.
like the baby from Eraserhead. Which maybe and Giger didn't say anything to discourage that. I do know that when the art department was designing the film, they were trying to make it look different from any other science fiction thing. Certainly, stuff like Star Wars or 2001, which Tony Masters also designed, would have been verboten. The ships looking kit bashed or, with lots of,
Right, yeah.
kind of extraneous ornamentation on them. Like all of the designs in Dune were honed to their kind of simplest form. The ornithopter is just kind of like a diamond shape. The diamond, which is a symbol that comes up again in Twin Peaks, and is definitely a Lynchian thing. And like and the other ships are the Harkonnen Highliner or whatever is like it's just these kind of ovals. It's all very simple stuff, and that is the hardest thing in design, is to get things down to their simplest, most iconic form. Another thing they teach you in design is a really good design is recognizable in silhouette, and you can say that about probably most of the designs in Dune as well. So it's just an impeccably designed film from top to bottom, and that is one of the things that you can't. I don't think you could argue with.
Yeah.
Like unless you're being like a super hyper contrarian, you can't say Dune is not a beautiful movie.
Very true. You talk about
Yeah.
in the book as well how Lynch had this kind of notion that each planet should have its own elemental touchstone. And I can't remember them off the top of my head, but obviously I feel like maybe Caladan would have to be wood, and then Arrakis
Prime
stone.
is steel.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
And then gold and jade for what's
Titan.
the first? Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go.
Just in case there's like a thing about whether or not I might be like thumping for transcendental meditation or something like that. I just want to make it very clear, like I'm not part of the organization of transcendental meditation. I'm not part of any of that. I practice it briefly on my own without any guidance, just as research for the book. I did it for a couple weeks, and it was interesting. But yeah, like I'm not pro or anti. I just think it is something that you need to reckon with to understand David Lynch's Dune the same way you would want to understand that Alfred Hitchcock is obsessed with blondes, or Christopher Nolan is obsessed with dead wives, whatever, kind of pick your, your directorial obsession, Guillermo del Toro with Clockwork, every director has a kink or an obsession, and, or at least the good ones.
A totem, yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. Since you mentioned the transcendental meditation, I don't know if you've seen I'll have to put this in the show notes. I'll put the links to the Transcendental Ending storyboarding and the Den of Geek in the show notes as well, both
Thank
for
you.
listeners and just so that you know. There's a conversation with Harry Dean Stanton and David Lynch, and I forget the specific quote, but it's something about the self, and they're both like, there is no self, and then they just kind of like laugh. I'll have to paste that in the show notes too, but that was
I mean, that is one of the reasons why I like David, is he definitely has a sense of humor about stuff. He's not like, if he is pretentious, he's a funny pretentious. There is just something lovable about him. And for people who think that like his like, gee golly, attitude is somehow fake, I can tell you from personal experience, it's not. That's the way that's really the way he is.
He's like, I don't want the movie to look like it's from the future. I want it to look like the 1950s, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, some of the sets, like I mentioned the staircase, but the wood, sort of Baroque wood set whenever Mohiam comes to test Paul in the Lynch film. I mean, that's one of my favorite visual moments, where they're profiled in the frame and there's just this incredibly ornate wood in the background. I mean, just the lighting in that scene.
One of my favorite interviews that he did around the time it was released, he said something like, Dune is a nifty movie. This is partly part of why I love it, is because you watch a movie like I think actually Terry Gilliam said this. He said, like, if you watch 2001: A Space Odyssey, it ends with a question, you might not understand it, but like you talk about it, you try to dissect it, you try to, it makes you think. And then you compare it to a movie like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which ends with an answer, and it's a stupid answer. It's little girls in alien costumes. So it's a little reductive, but I think it's true. I think, yeah, there are some movies that you can think about, and there's others that are just, they're just mental flaws.
The set where Paul gives the "Long Live the Fighter" speech, that scene or setting is just amazing. I don't know if how many extras that was. That's a really interesting location, you know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
it's got the
Yeah.
huge, like, the immensity of it is definitely
Yeah.
communicated on screen in a way that makes it feel very believable that, we're on this alien sort of cathedral-like place.
I believe the word I used to describe that sequence is Reifenstalian.
Yes, very good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And yeah, no, and I mean, I think even Gene Siskel, when he saw it, he hated the
Ah,
movie.
yeah.
When he saw it, he's like, oh yeah, this has got Triumph of the Will all over it, and it's like, yeah, and like Star Wars, which also incorporated elements of that, and Close Encounters, that kind of awe, that sense of awe, and sense of mass, these masses of people. You do have to reckon with that. Is it used ironically? Is it used literally? Is it just, a tool that now filmmakers have in their pocket? In terms of the technical aspect of that scene, I believe it was, several hundred extras in a portion of the set, and the rest was a matte painting by Albert Whitlock.
I have to go back and look at that with, like, a very close eye and see if I can distinguish the matte painting. Sometimes you can, depending on the movie, but like you said, here, there's very kind of expert use of miniatures in a lot of the scenes where if you look and look very closely, you can kinda tell, but a lot of times, it's not even really that noticeable. I mean, I prefer actual effects over CGI, obviously. I don't think I don't
I
think
think
that's,
I think most people
a
do. Yeah.
not a controversial opinion at all.
I'm of the opinion that the real sweet spot is the combination of the two. A lot of people will look at a movie like Mad Max Fury Road and mistakenly think that all that is practical. It's a lot of practical sweetened
Yeah,
with
that makes sense.
CGI. And then you look at a movie like The Phantom Menace and you think, oh, that's all CGI. When in actuality, there's more practical model work in The Phantom Menace than in the entire original trilogy of Star Wars.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's funny because I was thinking, is it Attack of the Clones where they're in the Colosseum? Because there's this
Mhm.
very distinct gif of this, and it's like all of the fighters are there and they're just moving around. It's like one of the goofiest things I've ever seen in my in my life. So that's hilarious to find that. I had no idea. I would have never
Yeah.
guessed in a million years.
In terms of practical effects, I mean, I think a lot of filmmakers have missed out on what could have been a golden age of practical effects being integrated with CGI. Because like back when they were doing Dune, it was all these models and stuff were married optically, and it was a process that degraded the image, and it was very time consuming and expensive, and yeah, and now like they played with it a little bit on like shows like The Mandalorian, where you can shoot a model and you can marry that footage into a CG background seamlessly. And it's like I don't know, and you can of course print, what do they call it? Computer printing,
3D print?
3D printing. Yeah, you can 3D print models now. You can build it in a computer digitally and then print it for real and then shoot that. And
That's
I don't
true.
know
There's a
why.
lot of flexibility in that, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why more people haven't embraced that, because like anything practical that you can shoot is always going to look more realistic than something you can do in the computer realm.
Suppose we can maybe move on a little bit to talk about the soundtrack to the film. Toto
Yeah,
is feels like an incongruity. I'm trying to even think of one of those hit Toto songs besides Africa.
Rosanna.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good one. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of funny. I mean, I do think obviously Brian Eno is involved just with the prophecy theme, but I think the prophecy theme is like it's great. It's fantastic. I think what I love about it is it has the epic feel without being like the John Williams clone, right? It has this like
Mhm.
more modern synthesizers incorporated into it, but it still has this old school, really, really just epic. I mean, I love it, especially like the guitar riff is so great. Whatever effect they have on the
In the
guitar is
prophecy theme or in Toto's music?
in the maybe in Toto's.
I think
I get
Toto
them
Toto
mixed up a
integrated
little
the
bit.
guitars. Yeah, people get confused too. Like they get confused because it's like this is one of the reasons why Toto was a little upset, because it was like, if people liked the music, they would give the credit to Eno, and if people hated the music,
Ah,
they would blame Toto. Most of the music in the movie is Toto, but that prophecy theme is very memorable, and of course David got a lot of mileage out of it. He uses it in a lot of different places in the film. It is just one track that has a kind of new agey vibe to it, and I think that's what he was looking for. And I'm glad you brought up the music because, yeah, like I got to talk to David Page and Steve Lukather of Toto, and they're both fantastic, and they have obviously some great stories about working on the movie. And in a lot of cases, it's very revealing about the chaos that was happening in the post-production process, because the music is the thing you put in last. Yeah, and then they were sort of there when things were going pear-shaped.
real dicey, yeah.
I think it's a really good score. I think it's kind of Wagnerian. It's
Yeah, exactly.
it's really sweeping and big and ominous, and I'm kind of shocked it isn't sampled more or talked about more. I mean, I think part of the reason for that is that Toto didn't do any more soundtracks after that. They worked on some stuff behind the scenes, but like it wasn't actually Toto doing the compositions and stuff. So I think yeah, the fact that we don't have a canon to reckon with the same way we do with someone like Danny Elfman, or Mark Knopfler, other sort of pop musicians turned composers. I think it's a great, great soundtrack.
I mean, even what's his name? I'm blanking on the guy that did the soundtrack for the Villeneuve movie. He's done so much other stuff, but he was in like
Hans Zimmer.
Hans Zimmer, right? Hans Zimmer was even in a pop group. I can't remember who it is off the top of my head.
Hans Zimmer is like the antithesis to me. He's like the hackiest of the hacks, I think, and just in terms of like none of his stuff is particularly memorable. I know he did the soundtrack to Blade Runner 2049, and the only memorable piece of music in that movie is when they reprise the Vangelis at the end. Yeah, the rest of it just sounds like Hans Zimmer fell asleep on his organ or something.
Do you have someone that you interviewed that maybe stands out as far as like a favorite, or someone you just really enjoyed the rapport with, or that maybe you didn't expect to be so interesting or have a great rapport with?
Most of the people I talked to, I really enjoyed. I think, anybody I talked to didn't have to talk to me, first of
True,
all.
right? Yeah.
That
Well, we
nobody
know
is
how that goes.
nobody is obligated to talk about this movie anymore. Kyle was fantastic. Gave me so much time and gave me so many great stories. In terms of ones that are distinct, I think Bob Ringwood was exceptionally honest and gave me so many great, sort of warts and all details, and was not an asshole about it in any way. He
Yeah.
wasn't trying to badmouth anybody. If anything, he was very complimentary to everybody he worked with, but he was just like, there were problems on this movie, and he was very honest about them. So I really appreciated that. And then Molly Rin, I think her story really is very emotional because she's sort of plucked from obscurity, given this major role of Hera in the film, Paul's sort of siege wife. And yeah, and then in post-production had pretty much all of her scenes cut. You can still see her here and there, especially in the end scene where she's with the two little children. But like I can't imagine like sort of the up and down of that. Like she's
Right,
on the
yeah.
set for a long time, and she really, gave it her all, and like David really liked her. I think, it was just like her story, her and Jamas's story were the easiest to excise. Her story is really interesting because it's one that you haven't heard before, I think. I don't think anybody's ever interviewed her about the movie, and she really, she gets to tell her story. And I've seen some of the deleted footage of her that's not even out there of her character, and she was great. She had a very ethereal presence. I think she was wonderful. And she was supposed to kind of become a part of David Lynch's ensemble players, but it just didn't happen for this or that reason. And if you read the book, you'll find her story fascinating. And then probably the most emotional one for me was Alicia Witt, because I spoke to her, I think just 2 months after her parents died tragically. And I felt a lot of trepidation going into that interview because I knew that, she was 7 years old when she made the movie, so her parents were on set with her the whole time. So a lot of the film was probably inextricably linked in her head with her parents.
Right.
And I was very, when we started the interview, I was like, is there anything that's like a no-go or anything? And she's like, no, like, let's just talk. And she gave me so many great anecdotes about them and about her experience. And she has a great memory, that Alicia Witt. She's incredible.
I mean, I'm a huge Sopranos fan as well, and it's funny that she is in the D-Girl episode of The Sopranos. It wasn't until many years later, after I had seen the episode, that I found out that it was her. So that was kind of a cool little thing. I can't remember if you wrote much about this, about the choice to go with a voiceover for her character, Alia.
Yeah, I talked about that with Alicia. I think if you want to have a character who seems, beyond her years, that's an interesting choice to go with. I mean, obviously the most famous case of that would be like Mercedes McCambridge doing Linda Blair's voice in The Exorcist, uncredited. Somebody said, I think it was Molly actually said, that the person who dubbed Alicia was Francesca Annis, actually.
Interesting.
There are some interesting voice cameos that we talk about of like actors in the movie playing other characters, uncredited, that we talk about in the book. You can read the book, find out.
Did the Alia voiceover, do you have a take on that you want to share? Because it kind of worked for me. I'm not mad about it, I think.
Oh no, I like it. I think it's interesting. I mean, the whole thing of David is, his realm. If he sort of cornered the market on a realm of the cinematic world, it's the uncanny. And I think, that character, the way she's portrayed in the film, certainly embodies that. Like she's scary in the few scenes she's in. I have a message for Martib. She's creepy, and like, and I did hear, like I said, I've seen some footage of her unfiltered, of the actual Alicia Witt voice, and she kind of sounds like a little girl. It's a great performance, but it's like she sounds like a little girl. It's like, Joe wants to come and get me, or whatever. Like she came from New England. She has a little bit of a New England accent. I think it was the right choice. It doesn't take away from, anything, that she did. I think she's a great actress, and there's a lot of scary parallels too between Alicia and the character of Alia, because they're both prodigies.
Right, yeah.
They both have red hair. Their names are almost the same. And
That's
I think
interesting.
Alicia growing up was probably just as
Precocious, let's say.
precocious and isolated as Alia was. Yeah.
My brother's here with many Fremen warriors.
Many Fremen warriors.
They are here now.
And how can this be?
4 years. You opened the book talking a little bit about how you were having a conversation about the film and someone described it as campy. And that just kind of, I don't want to, triggered, let's say, is maybe, I'll use that with a kind of half joking tone, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
There is a little bit of truth to it, but overall, I don't think that the film is that campy. To me, where I see camp is a lot of the Baron behavior. Like he's chewing scenery a little bit. And then some of the other Harkonnen stuff is just over the top cliche villain laugh stuff. But some of it is like also very intense and like scary too. So
I mean, I think some of that comes from the fact that, I love to compare Baron Harkonnen, Kenneth Macmillan's Baron Harkonnen, with Dennis Hopper's Frank Booth from Blue Velvet. And by the way, Kenneth Macmillan was at one point considered to play Frank Booth. Both performances are big, really big. The difference is one is in a movie rated PG and one is in a movie rated R. And given the dialogue that Dennis Hopper has to say and the things that he does in that film, you're less inclined to call it campy. I think Ken McMillan's performance is big, but his character is big, and the character is an egomaniac, and the character is a sadistic asshole, and I think it's a measured performance. If you watch it, there's a lot of subtlety to it too, besides the big explosions and stuff. Like he's doing a lot. It's a very intense performance. He was a very intense actor. I think he was methody, kind of a little methody.
I believe
And
it. Yeah, I can see it totally.
Paul Smith is very hammy. He's always hammy in everything. And Sting is definitely, kind of
righteous.
Yeah. I mean, they're all big. It's like it is consistent. All the Harkonnens are big. All the Harkonnens are very brash, and they're assholes. Also, the way that Lynch handles the kind of homophobic way that Herbert writes the character is interesting, because he goes from being sort of like like the homophobic cliche to being this guy that likes to rip the heart cords out of twinks or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting way to go, but he, like Frank Booth, the Baron Harkonnen of David Lynch's movie, is he's sort of, I don't know what you call it, like a sexual omnivore. He wants to have sex with everything. He wants to have sex with his nephew. He wants to do, it's like, and it's not about sex. It's about dominating people, power. Absolutely. Yes. And I mean, that's the, he's a true sociopath in that way. And I think, and then Frank Booth is this exact same way. I'll fuck anything that moves, it's like Baron Harkonnen could have said the same lie.
Yeah, there's something about the heart plug that really singularizes, like it communicates the sadistic nature of the Baron like so well. It's really beautiful, I think, in a kind of fucked up way. One of my favorite lines from the performance is, okay, so whenever they add the whole scene, the pure Lynch scene of Thufir and the cat with the with the rat that is taped to the cat that Thufir has to milk because they've poisoned Thufir, and Sting's like, all I see is an Atreides that I want to kill. And McMillan goes, no, Fade. Thufir's a Harkonnen now.
Right.
It's so great.
I love that scene. Yeah. Somebody else was asking me about that scene. They're like, that's not from the book, right? I'm like, no, there is no cat rat milking antidote box in the book. And not only that, they made a toy out of it too.
Right.
I believe
yes, they did.
The Sting figure came with that. And I'm just like, what the? That is a perfect example of how misguided
that's hilarious.
The merchandising bonanza around Dune was.
The 80s, what a decade, man. Just what an incredible time to be alive, I think, ultimately.
Yeah. No, it's true. Like, I mean, it's like, like in what other decade could you have toys made from RoboCop and Rambo and Terminator? It's like, what were you thinking? If they could have, they would have done like I don't know, like Brundlefly action figures, transforming Brundlefly, whatever. They would have done it.
In the book, the Baron, I would kind of liken him to almost a Tywin Lannister kind of character, where like he's definitely like his appetites are sort of present, but they're more, it's not so out in the open, right? Like he's not so flamboyant, I think.
It's unfortunate. I mean, that is kind of, where, I think some of Herbert's own unfortunate politics kind of bleed into it. I think he was a little bit probably homophobic in real life. I know he had a gay son.
He did have a gay, and he didn't take it very well.
No, he wasn't happy about that. He was not like a super supportive, oh, you just do whatever you want to do, son. He was not like that, sadly. And everybody has blind spots, but I mean, that is part of the literary legacy of Dune, and I guess it hasn't aged that well, but for some reason, I think the way Lynch handled it is kind of cool.
I heard on another podcast that you don't collect action figures per se. I will have to admit that I did buy, I don't have the original run of the figurines, but I did buy the, what is it, Super 7. I bought the whole set that they have available.
Yeah, yeah, and I interviewed the guy Josh Herbolsheimer from Super 7. I interview him in the book about that, and it's so cool that they put those out too. Yeah, I believe that the Super 7 ones are 3.75 inch, and the LJN ones were 5 inch.
Have you seen them up close by chance? The Super 7 or levels, whatever.
Oh,
I'm
I mean,
messing
I
up the name.
photographed them for the book.
Okay, gotcha.
They sent me 2 sets, and
Oh, nice.
I gave one away at my first signing.
I remember
Yeah,
reading
and
that,
no, I think they're fantastic because it's like they stuck so true to the original LJN designs, and it for all the people out there who don't want to pay whatever $100 a pop for those things, you can now get them again. I mean, I used to get them at like, yard sales and stuff, mistaking them for Star Wars toys.
yeah. The one that I really lust after though is the worm.
I gave mine away at my first signing to a lucky lady. I was so happy it found a good home. I hope it's in a terrarium or something somewhere now. No, but I love the way there's this writer from Medium named John DeVore, and he describes that worm toy as a ribbed for your pleasure nightmare toy that Freud
Sounds about
would
right,
advise
yeah.
against buying.
That's hilarious. I'll show you this really quick. I know this might not even. I have a Chris knife.
Oh, cool.
It's a molding from the original prop. Yeah, there we
Oh,
go. You can kind of
sick.
see it. Yeah. And it even has the gold end. I mean, it's painted gold, but it's a pretty cool little prop for like $100, I think. It's
Nice.
more or less somewhere in that range.
Yeah, a lot of the actors told me that they wish they'd swiped Chris knives and stuff from the set, but they were told, oh no, we got to save those for the sequel, guys.
That's great. I love it.
We could maybe wrap up here I don't know if you have anything that we haven't touched on that maybe you wanted to discuss in particular that you were very passionate about as far as the book that kind of stands out. Or
My sort of great white whales on the book were like finding out about the casting, which I did, finding out, trying to get the real story about why John Dykstra and Apogee Effects left the film, which I kind of did. I mean, I talked to Dykstra and I talked to the guys that replaced him. The truth is somewhere in between, I think. And then and then beyond that, it's just getting to the bottom of this TM thing, which again, it was so vindicating to have David Lynch kind of say, yeah, you're right. I hope that makes people see the film in a different light, and it is a worthy movie, and people really need to I think Lynch fans and sci-fi fans should all, if you read the book, my hope is if you like the film, you'll like it more, and if you hate the movie, you will hate it less after you read the book. But yeah, I mean, I guess if you read anything that was 500 pages about something, you'd probably like it a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah, seriously.
The only other thing maybe was like the pugs.
Space pugs. Hell yeah.
Which I don't know if I need to talk about that, but I will say if you read the book, I think I get to the bottom of the pugs. I think I cracked the code on it, and I think once you read what I have to say, it's pretty hard to not see it that way, because it's like a lot of people think the pugs are just some weird detail that David Lynch threw in for shits and giggles, and I think that's absolutely not true. I think they're there for a purpose, and yeah, I don't know if people will agree with me, but it's in the book. Check it out.
I have up a picture of this is also one of my favorite scenes, and we can maybe kind of wrap up with a little fun discussion on this a little bit.
With my favorite character, Stilgar.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Taylor's kind of if I'm not mistaken, you're a kind of a McGill fan as well. His voice is fantastic. The way he says the Feta Keen here, I just absolutely love it. But another great,
he brings. I can't say it any other way. He brings that big dick energy.
What's interesting about this photograph is here's a little bit of trivia for you. Okay, so the character to the left of Stilgar is Othiam, and
and that actor was also with him in License to Kill.
He is in the scene whenever Muad'Dib is training the Fremen in the weirding way, with the weirding modules. He's the one that goes, Usul no longer needs the weirding module.
That's right. Yes. I forget his name, but yeah, he's
Althaim. So actually what's really kind of neat is I didn't even realize that some of these other Fremen characters were named. He's
Mhm.
one of them. The second one being Korba
Mhm.
that show up in Dune Messiah.
Yes.
Korba is the high priest of the Kizzarat in Dune Messiah, and I'll show you a picture of him in a minute. But Othayim is the one. He's the house that they go to at the end of Dune Messiah, where the stone burner or whatever explodes.
Oh, interesting.
Othayim on the
Okay.
left, right?
Okay.
Because he was one of the Fedaykin or Fedaykin, I think is how it's actually supposed to be pronounced.
There's a lot of mispronunciations in the movie, like Cheney and Chani.
I'm gonna pull up a picture of Korba real quick.
Yeah, I know what he looks like. The guy with gray hair, right?
Yeah, he had the kind of balding.
I tried for so long to find out who that actor was. I think it might be this guy who was in Pickpocket, but I'm not sure because that actor was credited on the call sheets a lot. But
That's Korba.
yes, not 100% sure the actor playing him there.
I guess the final thing we could do is if I don't know if you have thought about, you probably haven't thought this far ahead, but do you have any kind of projects or maybe even events associated with the book that you want to maybe plug or discuss or anything like that? Anywhere else where we could find maybe some of your other work that you've written, because you mentioned being a film journalist as well.
I'm in the process of uploading a website that I just built. So that might be up by the time this podcast goes up. I am on the social media site formerly known as Prince. I'm just my name, MAXEVRY. I'm also on Instagram, MaxEvery1. And if you want to find, if you're less interested in the me of it all and more interested in the Dune of it all, that's where you want to go. You want to go to the Instagram because the Instagram is entirely devoted to the book and to David Lynch's Dune. And yeah, I post lots of quotes and facts and stuff, even stuff that's not in the book. I mean, I think the idea is to, if the book is popular enough to do a paperback that might have a little bit more stuff in it. We'll just have to see. But I don't know. Like I that's not a guarantee. So you should definitely get the book now while you can. And I'm working on something with actually right after I get off of this podcast, I'm going to be talking to Molly Rinn again about possibly releasing one of her deleted scenes with an introduction by her.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
I think that'll be it's one of the deleted scenes nobody's seen. So I think that'll be, and it involves Alia, and it's great. It's like something from a Cronenberg movie, actually.
That sounds amazing. I forget actually. I lied, but I was gonna wrap up, but I can't remember the situation with the footage that was originally shot. I vaguely recall there might have been a fire, and it's unclear whether some of the original Lynch's footage survives to this day.
Yeah, so in 2008, there was a fire at Universal. A lot of shit got destroyed, like not just movies, but, music, original masters of music, and all sorts of stuff. It was a terrible fire. And I do not know if the Dune footage was there or not, because Dune was it was released by Universal Pictures in America and some other territories, but it's actually an independent production technically.
Right, yeah. De Laurentiis films, yeah.
Yeah, it was actually a De Laurentiis movie, so it's possible that the material might not have been stored at Universal. So I asked Rafaela De Laurentiis about this. She said she didn't know, but she could find out, and then she never got back to me. So
Interesting.
It's possible I might be able to get in touch with her again and ask her about it again. I mean, she also might not have told me because there are rumors that Criterion might be working on a new version of the film.
That'd be awesome.
I mean,
I would love that so much.
I would do backflips if that happened.
Yeah, same, totally.
I'm 42 years old, so I'll probably die doing that. But
gotta get your Prana Bindu training, my friend.
Yeah. Kyle said that when he envisioned that when he was reading the book, because Kyle's a huge Dune fan, like an OG Dune fan from even before the movie. And he said he envisioned something more like what they did in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon for that fighting style. I encourage, if you're a Dune fan, definitely, pick this book up, find me on social, let me know what you think. And because it was 2 years of my life writing this book. So I love talking to people about it now that it's out in the world. And if you want to see more of my other stuff, I do a lot of Blu-ray audio commentaries for companies like Kino Lorber and Arrow. I have one coming out in November. It's Michael Mann's Black Hat, which is coming to 4K, and I have an audio commentary on that.
Oh, that's awesome. Nice. that stuff, the Instagram, Twitter,
Mhm.
etc. We can put links in the show notes so that people can find you really nicely and conveniently. I was
Mhm.
just thinking though, we didn't really talk much about the kind of funny relationship between Dino De Laurentiis and David Lynch, and that he kind of
Mhm.
like Lynch said he was great, like Dino was great. This is actually the impression that my roommate did the other night. He's like, "Oh, Dino, he's a numbers guy. He wants the picture to make money."
The line he says in his book, Room to Dream, he's like, Dino didn't want poetry. No fucking way. He wanted action.
Exactly.
No, did you guys have any other questions or anything? Or are we wrapping up?
I think we can wrap
Yeah.
up another edition of the Machinic Unconscious Happy Hour with Cooper Cherry and Taylor Atkins. Thanks to Max Evry for joining us, and long live the fighters.
The very roots of evil, of negativity and singularity, including the ultimate form of singularity, which is unconscious. The whole state of things, the pure violence without object anymore. This is the typical violence of information. It's violent because what happens there is a murder of the real, the vanishing point of reality.
Let's not have a misunderstanding here. What I meant is the following.
With nothing left but recycled, whitewashed, lobotomized people, as in Clockwork Orange.